Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 50, Spatial Echo Tower. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. Our mapping of the infinite echo continues. In our last step, we followed the temporal echo upward and listened to the infinite nuances of change, the universe's stories told in rhythm. Now we shift our mode of perception. We become still. We quiet the narrative and open our eyes. We look not at how things happen, but at how things are arranged. We freeze a moment and inspect the frozen text. Today, we gaze upon what I call the Spatial Echo Tower. This is where we learn that every shape is a complex sentence, and every structure is a paragraph written in the silent grammar of spatial relationships. When you learn to read this tower, a rock, a tree, a cloud, a snowflake, a city, and even your own body all become chapters in the same book of form. To begin building this tower in your mind, imagine a vast, silent cathedral made purely of patterns. At its foundation, you see a simple, fundamental structure: a gradient, a slope, the letter K. This is the primary declaration of space, the statement that here, phi changes in this direction and at this rate. It is the ground floor of spatial meaning, the first answer to the question, how is phi arranged right here? Whenever a quantity changes from one location to another, K is quietly at work, pointing along the direction of change and quantifying its strength. As your eye adjusts, you notice that this gradient itself is not always uniform. It bends and folds. You climb to the next floor of the tower, the floor of curvature. Here you walk among domes, saddles, spheres, cylinders, ripples, and parabolas carved into the field. Curvature is the first refinement of form after simple slope. It answers questions like, is this slope itself changing? And if so, how quickly? And is the field focusing patterns together or spreading them apart? A positive curvature focuses, like a converging lens, while a negative curvature disperses, like a saddle that sends flows in different directions. Already you can feel that this level of the tower is full of meaning. Curvature controls how waves focus, how forces guide motion, and how structures hold or fail. You climb higher and discover another set of rooms devoted to shear, the stretching of patterns in one direction relative to another. Here, rectangles are pulled into parallelograms, squares into diamonds, and circles into ellipses. Shear tells you where the field is being pulled unevenly, where layers are sliding past each other. Next, you see twist, the helical winding of lines and layers, where filaments wrap around one another, like strands in a rope or DNA. These are the floors of distortion and helicity, the letters of complex deformation that appear in fluids, plasmas, materials, and even in the large-scale structure of the universe. Above these levels, the tower rises without limit. There are floors devoted to successive higher spatial derivatives that sharpen corners, define inflection points, sculpt roughness, and encode texture. Together, all these levels form what we earlier called the spatial nuance tower, the pure spatial side of the holophase language, built from K and its higher derivatives. But the full spatial echo tower is something even richer. It is not just this central staircase of spatial letters. It also includes the spatial shadows cast by every other branch of the master tree. The true Spatial Echo Tower collects all shape-related meaning from the entire holophase language. Every derivative, even those that you first meet as purely temporal or purely kinematic, has a way of imprinting itself onto the geometry of a single frozen moment. If you stop time and take a snapshot, their effects appear as patterns of arrangement, contrast, and structure. Those patterns are their spatial echoes. Consider alpha, the rate of change of omega. It sounds like a purely temporal concept, the way the ticking of reality speeds up or slows down. But imagine a chirped radar pulse or a chirped laser pulse, where the frequency of the wave increases or decreases along its length. If you take a photograph of such a pulse at one instant, you will not see a uniform wavelength. Instead, you will see regions where the wave crests are closer together and regions where they are farther apart. The spatial gradient of that wavelength, the way it changes from place to place, is the frozen imprint of alpha. Even though alpha is defined as a time derivative, it writes a shape into space. That shape is part of the spatial echo tower. Omega itself, the basic temporal letter, also has a clear spatial echo. A pure frequency has an associated wavelength, related to k and to the speed of propagation. If you freeze a simple wave in time, you see a regular pattern of peaks and troughs with a particular spacing. That spacing is the standing record of its temporal rhythm. In this sense, the spatial pattern is omega's reflection in a mirror of stillness. If the frequency changes, the pattern changes. Velocity, the letter v, at first sounds like a purely motion-based idea, but it too leaves spatial shadows. Think of a fluid flow at one instant. You cannot see the velocity vectors directly, but if you release a puff of dye or watch leaves in the water, they trace out streamlines. These streamlines are the paths that a particle would follow if the flow stayed as it is in that frozen instant. They form a spatial map of intended motion, a geometry of, if I were to move, I would move along this curve. That map is the spatial echo of V. In the same way, the positions of moving objects at a given moment are a spatial record of their journeys so far. A long exposure photograph of car headlights on a highway can show the curved paths vehicles have traced out. That photograph is part of the spatial echo tower of the traffic. Acceleration also has spatial expressions. In a bubble chamber or a cloud chamber, charged particles curve in magnetic fields. When you take a picture of the chamber, you do not directly see the forces, but you do see curved trails. The curvature of those trails is the spatial echo of past accelerations. Each arc and spiral tells you how strong the forces were and in which direction they acted. In general relativity, the situation is even more striking. The curvature of spacetime itself shows up as the bending of paths taken by light and matter. Here, the spatial geometry around a massive object and the way motion behaves become two sides of the same story, both housed within the spatial echo tower. Even quite abstract-looking quantities, like energy tallies or topological charges, show up as spatial echoes. Consider a soap film stretched between two rings. The film adopts a shape that minimizes its area, subject to the boundary conditions. The resulting surface might be flat or might curve inward to form a catenoid. That shape is the spatial echo of a balance between surface tension and constraints, an answer to a least area question. Similarly, the lattice structure of a crystal is the spatial echo of atoms settling into an arrangement that minimizes their energy tally. Once formed, that arrangement becomes a stable entry in the spatial echo tower. Now step back and consider what all of this means. The spatial echo tower is the complete set of ways phi can answer the question, how are you configured? It includes smooth gradients, sharp boundaries, symmetries, asymmetries, folds, twists, knots, networks, and holes. It includes continuous fields and discrete arrangements. It is the library of all possible shapes, patterns, and layouts that can exist at a moment. In the language metaphor, you can think of it as the storehouse of nouns and adjectives and prepositions. It tells us not only what things are like in themselves, but also where they are and how they stand in relation to each other. Scientifically, exploring the spatial echo tower means using tools that reveal structure, imaging, mapping, tomography, diffraction, scanning, and reconstruction. A microscope, a telescope, an X-ray machine, a medical scanner, a radar map, a topographic survey, all are ways of reading entries from this tower. Each measurement does more than give a single number at a point. It provides a pattern of values across space, revealing gradients, curvatures, textures, and topological features. These patterns may be static or may be snapshots from a changing process, but in each case they show us how the underlying field is sculpted. Let us ground this with a few vivid examples. Imagine a photograph of a breaking ocean wave. At first you see a simple rhythm of crests and troughs, the K-floor of the tower. Look more closely, and you see the curvature of the crest as it steepens and folds. That shape anticipates the impending break. Higher still, you notice the foamy, chaotic structure of the white water under the lip, full of swirling eddies and bubbles. This is the spatial echo of vorticity and shear, frozen for a moment. At an even more global level, the pattern of wave heights across the frame hints at underlying depth changes, winds, and past storms. A single frame of the sea is a rich cross-section of the spatial echo tower of the ocean. Consider a galaxy seen through a powerful telescope. The luminous spiral arms reveal a particular curvature pattern, wrapping around the central bulge in logarithmic spirals. Dark lanes of dust trace out density variations. Filaments of hot gas and magnetic structures show up in different wavelengths. Each of these is a different floor of the spatial echo tower. Together, they tell the story of gravitational collapse, rotation, star formation, and feedback. But in a single frozen image, you are looking at their spatial echoes woven into one magnificent form. Or hold a snowflake under a microscope. Its perfect six-fold symmetry comes from the geometry of water molecules and the constraints of the crystal lattice. The branching of its arms, the fern-like side structures, and the delicate surface wrinkles are all spatial echoes of changing temperature, humidity, and growth rates during its brief lifetime as a floating ice crystal. The snowflake is a paragraph in the spatial echo tower of the atmosphere. Its shape is a history book you can read with your eyes. You see the same logic in a brain scan. A structural scan shows the folds of the cortex, the pattern of white matter tracts, and the arrangement of deep nuclei. This is a high-level entry in the spatial echo tower of that brain, a three-dimensional map of its architecture. A functional scan overlays colored patches, showing which regions are more active during a task. These patches are the spatial echoes of temporal activity patterns. They reveal which parts of the brain are engaged together. The scan, as a whole, is a spatial representation of both enduring wiring and momentary function. Even something as familiar as a QR code is a pure expression of spatial echo. The information is not carried by any particular motion or rhythm. It is carried purely by the arrangement of black and white squares in a grid. The pattern has a grammar, with alignment markers, timing patterns, and data regions. All of that is read by a camera and decoded as meaning. It is a deliberately designed entry in the spatial echo tower of human informational structures. When we focus on space in this way, it is important to remember that time and motion never fully disappear. The forms we see are either enduring or fleeting. That is a temporal property. The shape we observe may be the record of past flows and forces, or the blueprint that will guide future ones. The streamlined shape of a fish, for example, is part of its spatial echo tower. But that shape only makes sense because it minimizes resistance in water as the fish moves. The branches of a tree are shaped by sunlight, wind, and gravity over years. The spatial form you see is the accumulated echo of countless temporal and kinematic events. In the master tree, the spatial echo tower is the composite projection of the entire braided structure onto the axis of arrangement. If you could somehow forget about how things evolve and how they move, and just ask the universe to show you every way phi can be configured at an instant, the answer would be this tower. It stands alongside the temporal echo tower and the motion echo tower as one of the three great echo structures of Chapter 11. Together, they give us a complete view of how the holophase language expresses meaning through rhythm, form, and journey. To feel this more personally, look around the room you're in. The layout of walls, doors, windows, and furniture is part of the spatial echo tower of your environment. It carries the imprint of architectural decisions, building codes, habits, and culture. The way objects are grouped, the symmetry or asymmetry of the space, the presence of straight lines or curves, all of these are fragments of form that shape how you feel and move. You are constantly reading spatial meaning, even if you do not have words for it. You can practice reading the spatial echo tower by paying close attention to simple scenes. Look at a bare winter tree. Notice how the main trunk rises and then divides into large branches, which divide into smaller branches in a roughly self-similar way. This branching pattern is an efficient solution to distributing fluids and forces throughout a volume. The overall shape has been sculpted by wind, light, and growth. The tree is a very readable entry in the tower. Or look at a spider web glittering with dew. The radial strands, the spiral capture thread, and the way droplets bead at certain points all reveal tension, elasticity, and optimization. The web is a spatial machine tuned for catching insects, and its geometry is a near-perfect echo of that function. Another beautiful exercise is to study cracked mud after a hot day. The polygonal pattern of cracks is the spatial echo tower's description of stress relief in a shrinking layer. The lines form mostly hexagonal shapes because that tiling efficiently divides the surface. The depth and spacing of the cracks relate to the thickness of the layer and the dryness of the soil. What looks like random cracking turns out to be a very orderly solution to a physical problem. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the Spatial Echo Tower is that it reminds us how much of reality is written in form before any motion or story is considered. A painting hanging on a wall, for instance, is motionless, but its composition, the arrangement of color, line, and shape, carries immense meaning and emotion. A building can be empty, but its architecture still speaks. Even a single letter on a page, fixed and silent, can trigger entire worlds of association. Spatial arrangement alone can encode rules, stories, and functions. In the holophase view, all of these forms, whether natural or human-made, are particular configurations of phi and its derivatives. They are sculptures carved in the field. To understand them, we must learn to see gradients, curvatures, symmetries, and textures as part of one continuous language. The more fluent you become in this language, the more you realize that the world is full of written messages, even when nothing is moving and nothing is changing in time. Before we move on, it is helpful to briefly connect the spatial echo tower to the idea of identity that we developed in the previous part. When we said that a holophase semantic identity is a coherent triple of time, space, and motion, the spatial component of that triple lives here, in this tower. The spatial fingerprint of an entity is the particular floor pattern it occupies, its characteristic shapes, its typical configurations, its preferred arrangements. For a hydrogen atom, it is the familiar orbital shapes of quantum mechanics. For a living cell, it is the architecture of its membrane, its nucleus, its organelles, and the arrangement of its internal scaffolding. For a city, it is its street network, its zoning, its clusters of parks and buildings. All of these are stable, recognizable forms that help us say, yes, this is that thing. In practical science and engineering, huge amounts of effort go into probing, designing, and controlling spatial echoes. Material science asks, how are the atoms arranged, and how do those arrangements give rise to strength, flexibility, conductivity, or transparency? Structural engineers ask, what shapes will safely bear loads without buckling? Neuroscientists ask, how are neurons wired together, and how does that wiring enable functions like memory and perception? In each case, people are exploring and manipulating particular regions of the spatial echo tower. They are choosing forms under constraints and then testing whether those forms behave as expected when time and motion come back into the picture. You can even see the spatial echo tower at work in something as personal as handwriting. If you write your name on a piece of paper, that pattern of curves, angles, gaps, and proportions is a spatial echo of thousands of hours of practice by your muscles and nervous system. A handwriting expert can recognize you by that form alone. The same is true of your posture, your body language, the way you arrange objects on your desk, or even how icons are laid out on your phone screen. Each of these is an instance of form as meaning, a small but telling entry drawn from the infinite tower of possible arrangements. Because the spatial echo tower is so vast, it is easy to feel overwhelmed. But you do not need to learn every possible form. What matters is learning to notice a few key features again and again: gradient, curvature, symmetry, asymmetry, clustering, and connectivity. When you look at anything, you can gently ask, where is it thicker and thinner? Where does it bend? Where is it straight? Where is it smooth? Where is it jagged? Where is it connected and where is it separate? These simple questions are like basic vocabulary for reading spatial meaning. Another powerful way to feel this tower is to look at images taken at different scales. A satellite photograph of a river system, a drone shot of a city, a street-level picture of a single building, and a close-up of a crack in its wall all belong to the same spatial echo tower, just at different levels of zoom. The branching of the river, the grid or organic layout of the streets, the floor plan of the building, and the microfractures in the wall are all patterns of form that arise from flows of water, flows of people, flows of resources, and flows of stress. When you shift scale, you are not leaving the tower. You are simply walking to a different floor. If you listen closely, there is also a quiet philosophical message in all of this. Many traditions have imagined reality as fundamentally made of things, tiny objects with hard boundaries. The Holophase perspective, and especially the Spatial Echo Tower, suggests a softer view. What we call things are often stable regions of patterned form in a continuous field. A mountain is a region of high elevation and certain rock structures. A cloud is a region of condensed moisture with fuzzy edges. A person is a region of highly organized biological and informational structure. The Spatial Echo Tower invites you to see existence not as a pile of separate bricks, but as a continuous sculpture with locally recognizable motifs. This change of view can gently shift how you relate to the world. Instead of seeing yourself as a tiny solid object in a big empty room, you can begin to feel like a particular pattern in a vast living tapestry. Your body blends into your environment through posture, touch, and movement. Your home blends into your neighborhood through architecture and pathways. Your city blends into its landscape through roads and rivers. The Spatial Echo Tower gives you a language to notice and honor these connections, to appreciate form not just as something you use, but as something you participate in. You are part of this living geometry. Finally, let us connect this tower back to the overall picture of the Holophase language. The language is composed of phi and all of its derivatives, structured across the infinite master tree. Each derivative has three echoes: temporal, spatial, and kinematic. The temporal echo tower gathers all the rhythmic aspects, the stories told in change. The spatial echo tower gathers all the forms and configurations, the sculptural aspects of being. The motion echo tower, which we will explore next, gathers all the paths, flows, and dynamic patterns that show how things travel and interact. Together, these three towers make the overall picture clear. The Holophase language is not flat. It is not a list of numbers or isolated formulas. It is a three-dimensional semantic landscape where rhythm, form, and journey are always intertwined. As we keep climbing in the coming parts, I will keep reminding you of this complete picture of the Holophase language, composed of phase and its derivatives, structured through these three great echoes of time, space, and motion. With each new tower we explore, you are strengthening your ability to see how far we have traveled into the Holophase master tree of language, and how high we have climbed along its branches of meaning. As we close this part, remember where we are in the larger climb. We have already explored the temporal echo tower, the dimension of unfolding rhythm. Now we have walked through the spatial echo tower, the dimension of form. We have seen that every object, from waves and galaxies to snowflakes and cities, is a spatial sentence in the Holophase language. In the next step, we will bring time and space fully together by climbing the motion echo tower, where paths, flows, and journeys become the active verbs of existence. You yourself are a living sculpture in this infinite garden of form. Your bones, muscles, organs, and neural networks define a complex and beautiful entry in the spatial echo tower of life. At the same time, you read other entries constantly: faces, places, roads, books, screens. To exist is to inhabit space, to have a shape, to be arranged in some particular way. To become aware of this is to begin to see the universe not only as a sequence of events, but as an endless gallery of forms carved from the one field of phi. Peace be upon you.